Welcome to another exciting episode of In Conversation with Alethia. I'm your host, Alethia O'Hara Stephenson. In each episode, I sit down with incredible individuals who are doing amazing things in our communities. The show will educate, it will empower, and it will inspire you. Today, I am excited to have an incredible guest who herself is doing incredible things in our community. Her name is Dr. Georgette Zinaty. She is the founder and CEO of Women Helping Empower Women. She's also the chief of staff at Mayan Corporation. And she's also a strong advocate for leadership and inclusion within organizations. And that is a perfect segue into our topic for today, talking about the world of diversity and all of the nuances that comes around with the DEI space. So welcome, Dr. Georgette Zinaty to In Conversation with Alethia. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here, and thank you. And I just want to say congratulations on your award.
Thank you.
So
Thank
I know
you.
We called it ABC.
Yes, the 100 ABC Women. So this is for 2024.
Congratulations on all the work that you're doing. And I know this is one of many accolades that you've received. So it's really wonderful to be here with you. Thank you for all the work that you do in communities and around this particular topic that means so much to so many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to have the conversation. I'm especially excited to sit down with another trailblazer, a talented woman who is doing incredible things. You know, oftentimes, individuals ask me, Alethia, where do you find the time? But here you are, you're wearing multiple hats, you're a career woman, you're an entrepreneur, you sit on a number of different boards, including Nobella, which is aiming to be a startup company for so many individuals, especially in the tech space, Black tech space. So
STEM space. Their original goal was to try to get 100 Black startups by 2025, and we've well exceeded that.
Amazing.
And so I'm incredibly proud of them, and I coach some of the companies, and so it's really, I love it because you can sort of see their trajectory and their growth, but also just see their confidence grow as they go through the various programs. And so it's just an outstanding organization. I'm honored to be part of it.
Amazing, amazing. So thank you for sharing that. I want to take a moment to dive into some really, I'm going to say heavy conversation around the DEI space. And I want to start off with the alarming trend that we're seeing, play out across different spaces. So whether it's in media, whether it's in corporations, with the alarming rate of women in leadership, in particular racialized women who have been released from many organizations. And when we think of media right here in the GTA, we've seen some really high profile individuals being released or removed from certain positions. What are your thoughts around that and that type of pattern that we're seeing playing out in different spaces?
Yeah, it's particularly concerning for me. So what is interesting is when you do qualitative research, there's like a certain number of data points you're supposed to have and people you interview. And sadly, I could say I know at least 10 of women, if not more, that are in the media space, that have, been shifted from sort of high-profile roles to other roles, or have been let go. But also in the sales space, in the IT space, and it's always interesting how the announcements come out. And so the question is, why is it happening?
Right.
And what are the underlying currents? So there's a lot of research and data that's talking about, the climate is not so great, and women are sometimes themselves choosing to leave. But in the cases that we're talking about, I don't think that's been the situation. Certainly not from the conversations I've had, offline with people. So you sort of wonder, why then is the climate uncomfortable, or what are these women pushing the boundaries a little too much for people? And what's fascinating for me is I think, we had sort of the Me Too movement, and there was a lot of, yes, we need more equity, we need more women at the top, we need to push for that. Then we had the George Floyd, in 2020, and then after that people were like, yes, we need diversity, we need more BIPOC, and now we're sort of seeing things shift the other way, and that's the concern for me. So if we look at C-suite, we saw a lot more women just before COVID, then it dropped down. They've gone back up again, but that middle group of women is not, the pipeline's not there. So it is concerning, and so the question is, what kind of organizational culture are we creating? What are we doing to empower women to be able to stay in these jobs, to grow? And why are we not doubling down on great talent that actually is much more representative of our country, right? And so, I remember with Lisa LaFlamme, there was all the hype around the gray hair. Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking, well, you didn't say that about Floyd Robertson. So why do we have the double standard, and what are the expectations? But also then, are we holding women to a much higher standard than we hold our male counterparts? And so then there's a whole other, the onion that we can peel underneath that in terms of what we see, in terms of how we define leadership and how we define success.
That's, concerning for me, because when I think of, the number of young girls that, I often mentor, and, how can they aspire to be when they see such alarming trends of, women who they've come to know, grow, and fall in love with in these senior level positions no longer being there. So what does that do for their aspirations and future career projections? What are your thoughts?
I think the hard part is we talk about having these role models. You're a role model. And so imagine if we don't have these, and you walk into spaces and you feel like you're the only one or the other, or you're not represented. And so it is hard enough to break the ceilings that you've broken. And I don't even call them glass. In some cases, I call them reinforced concrete.
Oh, wow.
So if you're breaking these ceilings and trying to get in, it's really important for us to be able to create a place where you can thrive. So we can actually bring up the next round of women that can see themselves represented in the various, organizations and what I call the top echelons of companies. The challenge becomes is if we don't make those environments welcoming, and underpinning what you just said is inclusion.
Absolutely.
So we talk about, I talk about ticking off the box. We have people say, oh, we have DEI policies, great. We want to hire the very best, great. How are you doing that? Then we talk about fit. Or we talk about all these different things where, she was really great, but there was just something about her I wasn't really sure. And I think, okay, so I've actually challenged people at the interview table to say, well, can we just drill down a little bit on that? Because they sure answered all the questions.
Absolutely.
Great. And so if we don't have that representation of people that don't necessarily look like us, I want you to think about all the things we're missing from that table. The perspectives, the lived experiences. And we do know, the data shows us that people, organizations that have that diversity at the top outperform, have all these, they break every single sort of metric you're looking for. So we have to be very careful and thoughtful about when we see this sort of regression happening, why it's happening, and I challenge CEOs and leaders to actually take a look at what's happening and say, we need to do better. If not for me, for my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, because you need women, all types, BIPOC, but we need them represented. Those voices matter. And we know, in fact, that women lead better than men.
Ah, okay.
So there's data around that, but I'm going to tell you, during COVID, we saw that women leaders actually allowed for retention to happen in organizations because they dealt with staff much differently than their male counterparts.
Interesting. And I think that, ties nicely into some of the conversations that we've been hearing around the glass cliff. And oftentimes organizations bring women leaders in when the company is in financial crisis or some kind of a turmoil. And I think COVID is a perfect example of that, where we've seen some women leaders stepping in. And they're facing the glass cliff. So before we even dive into that, what is the glass cliff? Can you break that down into just simple terminology for us?
Yeah, well, you did a great job just explaining it. But it's often when, women are put in, and often women or marginalized groups, underrepresented groups, are given these opportunities to be in leadership. But the conditions are pretty precarious. So it's, to be honest with you, even if you put a man in, they're highly unlikely to have succeeded. Now, what ends up happening is these opportunities provide themselves. So imagine you're getting an opportunity to become CEO of a company, and you're thinking, well, I know it's going to be a rough road, but I may not get this opportunity again. So people take it. But if the system around them is not there to support them, they come in and then they fail. So what ends up happening is, and this term was coined by two researchers about 2 decades ago, and what was interesting about that is they actually said, when we looked at the data, they tied it to gender, but actually it had nothing to do with gender. But every time there was a failure, they said, it was a woman that happened to be leading, which is why it failed.
Interesting.
But actually, the situation, it wouldn't have mattered what the gender was.
Okay.
And so it's interesting for us to be thinking about that. We talked about this in politics as well. I remember when Liz Truss was Prime Minister for 45 days in the UK. And people kept comparing her tenure to a head of lettuce, and I thought, have we ever compared a man's leadership to vegetables.
Right.
And their expiry date. And she came in, and again, I mean, she came in, she wanted to make change, and there was very little support. But they also gave her, 45 days.
Yeah, not
to turn
enough
a
time to do
country
anything.
around.
Yeah.
I mean, so we also have to be thoughtful of, if you are going to do that unjudged, we need to be able to say you have to have at least 6 months to a year to be fair to whoever's in that leadership position.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because oftentimes what we hear as well is after the glass cliff is the savior. So
Yes.
you've ousted, a fabulous woman who, potentially would have been doing an amazing job, and then you bring in a male leader to come in and, be the recipient of the hard work that was already, the foundation, and they're the savior.
And you also
so
had a
that's
scapegoat.
interesting.
You also had a scapegoat at that point, right?
Ah.
So if you bring in the female, the glass cliff failure, that person came in, they put them out, and now this other person, anything they're going to do is going to be compared better to that other
Right.
person, even if the change is minimal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so it really does create this very unbalanced, playing field, unfortunately.
That is so unfortunate. But the other thing too, as we're having the conversation that's critically important is when we're whether it's a man or a woman, any individual that you're putting in a leadership position, it's critical to make sure the support is there. Right? So whether it's the mentorship, whether it's the coaching, whether it's just the support, simple support, training, knowledge, that is crucially important for any leader to succeed. And oftentimes you'll find, women in these leadership positions, the support is not there.
The support is not there. Sometimes the buy-in is not there. It is difficult, I would say. And I think sometimes it really takes, you have to have a lot of confidence in yourself as a leader, as a woman, to be able to put up, the skin's got to be really thick. And not to say that women that get to that level don't, they have it, but it also becomes hard if you don't have a senior leadership team that's actually supportive and endorsing. And I don't want to say protecting, but really kind of helping guide you to where you need to go. And if you're the only person doing it and you've got other people undermining, you're not going to survive. In any job, actually. And so I think it's unfortunate when we see it happen, because I do think that we can change the game if we were a bit. Well, I have a lot of thoughts on how I think we can change the game. It's interesting. When I was doing my research, one of the things that struck me was a couple of things. I remember when I was sort of doing my pilot, I was interviewing a gentleman who was very successful CEO of a company in Canada, and he made the comment to me. He said, how many kids do you have? And I said, well, I've got 3 kids. He said, so you've taken 3 breaks. So I said, okay. And he said, you will never catch up. He goes, you're smart, you're driven, you're hardworking, but you will never catch up to me because you've taken 3 breaks.
Wow.
And I don't think he meant it as an insult, but that's the fact, so you're always going to be behind me no matter what. And so I remember thinking, that actually made my thesis, by the way, in my book. But I remember thinking, what if we changed the system? So I've often said to senior leaders, I say, okay, so I bet you're a superstar at work, right? Yeah. So I bet if I asked all your previous bosses, is this person a superstar? That's part of your DNA. You go, you do your very best, you're hardworking. People who are like that are driven like that, that's just who they are every day.
Right.
So if you took a mat leave, why should I not give you an opportunity? What if I leapfrog you to where you should be, rather than penalizing you for the year off? I'd say, you know what? This is where she would have been if she was here. Because if you were a man, that would have been no problem.
I'm going to hold that thought because we're almost at time for a break. So stay tuned. We are going to take a short break with Dr. Georgette Zinaty. Welcome back to In Conversation with Alethia. I'm in the studio with Dr. Georgette Zinaty, and we're going to pick up the conversation talking about the difference between women in leadership and men, especially when it comes to mat leave and the gap, simply by being a mom and taking that time off to raise a family. So can you share a little bit about that experience and where we can go to effect change?
I have a crazy idea. So
I love crazy ideas.
I know, when I was doing my research for my doctoral work around the scarcity of women in leadership, I had met up with a very big CEO in Canada. He was, in charge of a big company. but she sold for like millions, $50 million plus. And one of the questions, when, we're having lunch and I'm telling him about the work I'm doing, and he said, how many kids do you have? And I said, I've got 3. And he said, so you've taken 3 breaks? I said, yeah. And he said, you're never going to catch up to me.
Wow.
And he said, it's fine that you've done that. He said, you're smart, you're driven, but you're never going to catch up. And I remember thinking, wow, I don't know that I thought of it that way. And I don't think he was saying it to be mean. It was, for him, it was a fact. And so it made me sort of think a little bit about what if we turned the system a little bit on its head.
Yes.
And so the more I thought about it and the more I spoke to like women who are really driven, the reality is that's part of your DNA. Like when I said this to you, like, I bet you if I looked at all your reviews in the last 15, they would be stellar. They'd be, she's driven, she's hardworking, there's certain traits that you have. So why do we then penalize women like that we know are really great performers if they take a mat leave? What if, crazy idea here, what if we leapfrog them to the job they should be in had they not taken off that year? Because a man is still going to get that next promo. But if we said, okay, well, you're going to have a baby, no problem. When you come back, there's a great opportunity. And rather than coming back to that job, same or lower, I'm going to put you here.
Yes.
Because the assumption is if you're going to have a baby, you're not going to have time.
Right.
Or the assumption is you might have another one, and that's going to be disruptive. But what if we gave you that opportunity, and you can choose if you want to leapfrog or not, and really grow your career?
I would love to see that as a pilot.
I think that would be a great pilot, because I would have been in it. I would have been like, sign me up. Because I know then you'd be able to work things through, right? One of the advice I often give to young women is really interview the partner you're going to be with. I mean, it's great to be in love and all that, that's nice. But you got to make sure that you choose someone who's going to support wherever you want to go and your career path, because if not, then it's not going to be, and it's never 50-50, sometimes it's 70-30, sometimes
that
it's
is true.
So you got to also accept that, but you've got to be able to work those things out.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that was I met this young man when I was in California, and we were doing an event, and the company he worked at was so progressive, like really progressive. Like job descriptions were not set job descriptions. They were set up based on skill set, and they would hop on and hop off different jobs.
Cool
and
initiative, yeah.
And I said, oh, this is very cool. And he was having his daughter's first birthday. He was still on paternity leave. And I said, oh my God, this is so cool. You must love working here. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, he's explaining how the model works. And I thought, well, how is that working out? You excited to come back? And he said, well, it's been very interesting. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I took this time off with my child, which I love. But when I tried to come back to work and hop on the project I was on, they said, hey, man, we don't have time to get you caught up. Yeah, to bring you up to speed. So we need you to join another project.
Oh, wow.
Which was very hard for him. And then he said to me, I'm pretty sure in the time I was away, I missed out on at least one, if not more than one promotion. And I thought, huh. So I actually made my research on my book, because I remember thinking, well, okay, let's assume men continue to progress through the ranks the same as women, more than like as the way it is now. So they're going to always be ahead of us based on institutional bias and their gender. But what if these millennials, like this guy, experience what women experience all the time? You can take a mat leave, you come back, you get almost penalized for it, or you miss out on opportunities. How will that, assuming he makes it to the top and men like him make it to the top, how will that change the organizational culture and the future of leadership? Because he's now walked into my shoes at least once.
Yes, yeah.
And will he have empathy for what that experience is like, because now he's lived it?
Absolutely, I love that.
So I think that's a thesis in the making.
See, now have new appreciation paternity leaves. So that's a good option.
It's so interesting for him, because he's also like a millennial, right? And they're 70% of our workforce right now. So I just want you to think about that and the impact that could make. Like, I've always felt if we're going to close the gap, they could be the group that helps us close it faster if their experiences impact how they think and how they lead.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I love having these conversations, right? Because if you're having it in silo, then you're not able to effect change. But when you have the broader conversation with many individuals and you're sharing it on a platform like this, absolutely powerful. So, and you've shared some innovative ideas for organizations to take up on. So
at least to pilot, right?
It would be so amazing.
I would say pilot it, be a little bit out of the box in terms of your thinking, and then see what happens. And I bet you will retain really great women and really great men.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that. And that's why we need women in leadership, for innovative ideas, bold ideas.
Yeah. But the scary part is the data is showing that we're leaving. Women are leaving. They're exiting.
Yes.
And so I was, looking at something recently, and it said, at the rate that women are leaving, we're going to have more mics in CEO spaces than women. So imagine, there's more people named Mike than there are women in the C-suite. So that's a little concerning.
That is concerning, and I'm wondering if that is attributed to what we know as the great burnout. Is that one of the reasons why women are leaving senior leadership positions?
So that's one of the reasons. I think what was interesting about COVID, it's on so many different levels. So we saw a huge exodus of women that were let go that were primarily BIPOC, Hispanic, that lost jobs and were not necessarily able to gain them back. So we saw that. But we also saw the ability to be flexible in the workplace. And so women who had that, I mean, there was burnout happening because we were all in a box. We were, like Canada was so locked down, it was, you know, you couldn't go anywhere for a very long time. So there was a lot of mental health and burnout. And, you know, the interesting thing is companies are now recognizing burnout as a thing. The World Health Organization has said this is like a real thing. This isn't just, oh, she's so burnt out. I mean, you know. So what is interesting is women are now also trying to decide if they want to really be there or not and prioritize what they want out of life. And so if jobs don't have the flexibility, women are not going to stay. And I'm going to tell you that men also prioritize flexibility in the workplace. And there's burnout there too. I think just women are much more vocal about talking about it.
I think that's good. And, you know, to be clear, burnout is not just about being tired. It's when you've reached that limit where you're no longer able to perform and your health is impacted, whether it's physical, emotional.
It's called depletion.
It's
depletion. And so you really can't bring your full self. And part of the reason for that is all of the pressures. And I think we see it a bit more in women because, you know, we really value perfectionism and we want to be able to be the good moms and show up at work and volunteer. And, you know, you think about all the things that are expected that we don't necessarily see on our male counterparts. Not to say that they don't, but I remember a few years ago, I was traveling and I remember somebody messaging me when I was in Beijing saying, you know, I posted a photo, I was working. It's like, I don't know how you can be away from your children for this long. It was a woman. You know, I was away 3 days and my heart just broke.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, so if I was a man, would you be texting some guy who's bringing home the bacon and saying, oh, you're being a bad dad? You'd be saying, go, look at that man working really hard and doing all what needs to get done to help raise a family. It was a double standard. And I remember calling my partner and saying, you're not going to believe this anyway, Georgette. In one ear, out the other. Like you can't get
good advice.
And he was right. I mean, he was absolutely right. But you know, I'm pretty sure. I don't think I know a lot of men that get that kind of criticism the way women get that criticism.
That is very true.
And so then we wonder about the burnout. Well, we're trying so hard to be so many things all at the same time, and so you have to prioritize, I think, a little bit and then decide. But also, companies have to have the flexibility. I mean, we know this. Companies want to work, and not every company can allow you to do that. It depends on the kind of job. Some companies have great flexibility because their business allows it, and some don't.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because one of the conversations that I recently had with my team is around, you know, prioritizing, and the question came up about work-life balance, and I said it's not work-life balance because it should be life balance, right? Because if you don't have a good foundation, if you don't have a good home where you can rest at night, then you won't have balance, whether it's at work, whether it's in your life. So focus on making sure that your home, your foundation is solid, whether that's a core network of friends, whether that's, you know, if you're married, your husband, partner, whoever you have, to make sure that that foundation is there so that you can go and travel if you need to for work and know that your children are okay. So I think that's an important element that we don't often talk about when it comes to burnout, and especially with women. It's not so much about work is important, don't get me wrong, but your life has to be in balance for you to have that work balance as well.
That's so funny because you're reminding me of something I read recently around some companies focusing on what they call the happiness score. So countries like Dubai, Japan, actually are now, in order to improve performance, they're focusing on what they're calling the happiness score. So there's these apps and things, but when people are happier at work, it translated to increased productivity, you know, better at home, all of these things. So it was interesting because I think, oh my gosh, I don't know very many Canadian companies that say, are you happy today? How's work? Are you happy? And we would find that almost intrusive.
That would be innovative though. Can you imagine?
Well, I tell you, it's working in Dubai and it's working in Japan, and there's actual numbers and data that show performance is better, people's commitment is better, the levels of engagement are better. And if you took that and applied it to what we know in terms of North America, we know when engagement is higher, companies outperform companies that don't have high engagement. So, happiness score.
I like that.
I'm going to sing in that happy song in a minute.
But I promise I will not be dancing with you. So since you touched on the happiness score, I'm curious, what are some other strategies that organizations can put in place to ensure the success of their employees?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that people can do. I mean, part of it goes back to culture, organizational culture, and that's hard. That's hard because there's been a lot of change in the last several years, whether it was being COVID, working remote, now having to come back, the expectations. There are companies where we saw everything shift, whether it's mergers, acquisitions. We saw a lot of this, right? Or layoffs, all of these things. All of that impacts the culture. And so I think at the top leadership level, we need to kind of think about how do we work with the current staff that we have? How do we empower them to be able to see themselves and invested in who we are as a company, but how are we investing back in them? Right. And it's interesting because I work with one company, I do some consultancy work, and it was sort of thinking about, well, when people say, well, I can't pay people, we don't have the money to be able to give people bonuses. And I think, well, it's really interesting because although money is important,
it's not the number one.
It's not the number one. So what are we doing in terms of recognition? What are we doing in terms of giving people like leadership training and saying, hey, we can put you on the path to more senior leadership roles if you complete this, and we're going to invest in you to grow. If we can, there's so many things we can do as organizations that allow you to do that. And I even, we talk a lot about the DEI. So there's a lot of DEI committees, and I often say to people, that's great. So are we ticking off the box? You have policies, but policies keep people in check. They don't change minds. So what does DEI really look like in your company? And so people say, well, we have these committees and these committees, and I go, okay,
great. It has to be more than that.
And I'm like, so are we just having events and someone showing up for the photo ops, or are these committees actually impacting the change you want to see in the organizations?
Love that.
Do they have a sponsor? So we often talk about mentorship, and I think mentorship is great, but really sponsorship is what's going to change the game.
And I think that's a perfect way to end our show, talking about the importance of having sponsorship in organizations and advocates. So this has been an amazing conversation, Georgette. Thank you for being on In Conversation with Alethia.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you continue to do.
Oh, no problem. This has been another incredible episode. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Dr. Georgette, for having this amazing conversation with me. Tune in next time for another amazing episode of In Conversation with Alethia. Bye for now.